today, I think that it's quite a symbolic one because we are closing the year somehow, the 2020, which was extremely fruitful in regard of the Mediterranean developments. And I guess that we are going to have a very interesting and good discussion on that. And please allow me to turn the microphone to Professor Andrey Kortunov for his opening speech today.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad that I have an opportunity to address this group of distinguished experts working on the region of East Mediterranean. I would probably not call this year fruitful. Oh yeah, I see Grigory Lukyanov. Hi, yeah. I wouldn't call it fruitful because definitely this year was quite volatile and in certain ways even disappointing. But academically, the good news about Eastern Mediterranean is that it's one of these few regions of the world where something always happens. It might be positive, it might be negative, it might make us hopeful, or it might make us hopeless, but it's a very vibrant, very dynamic part of the world. I think that for us, for Russians, this year in East Mediterranean started with the escalation in Idlib, and later on we had these two attempts to bring peace, or at least to bring stability to Libya. The first act of this drama took place in Moscow, the second one in Berlin. I think, again, not everything that was agreed upon in Berlin turned out to be practical and implementable. Nevertheless, I think things are arguably better than they could have been. Then we see many complications in very difficult political transition in Israel. And of course, on top of that, a new cycle of rapprochement between Israel and some of the major Arab countries of the Gulf and of Africa as well. We had further complications in Lebanon. On top of the financial meltdown, there was this very tragic accident in Beirut. So I think it's difficult even to list all these very important, sometimes very dramatic events that took place in Eastern Mediterranean over 2020. And I think even now, the year has not yet ended, but we can easily predict that next year will be also full of various events. Hopefully, we will have some positive changes, at least in some crisis situations. But definitely, there are also reasons to be concerned about certain developments. The pandemic in the region seems to be gaining speed. It also seems that next year we will see very serious manifestations of the repercussions of the current economic crisis, which has not hit many countries in the region too hard this year, but definitely there'll be some delayed consequences, which we will observe next year. Unfortunately, we can foresee potential escalations, including Syria, but maybe also in Libya. And the region will remain a place for great power geopolitical competition. Again, it offers certain opportunities for great power cooperation. I think that during this year, unfortunately, most of these opportunities were missed. We did not have real cooperation between outside players. And in very many cases, outside players were not a part of the solution, but they remained a part of the problem. Hopefully it will change, but again, we don't know. There are many black swans looming on the horizon, if I might say it. Definitely this region will be volatile and will be a risky region. I don't want to take too much of your time. Let me just emphasize that the Russian International Affairs Council is of being a part of this effort. We are glad that we continue our productive institutional but also personal cooperation with the High School of Economics and with our Italian friends. I think that Russia and Italy have a lot to exchange and to discuss on this issue. And let me just conclude with saying that we will continue to keep this region on our radar screen. And we hope that conversations like this one can bring maybe very small but not insignificant contribution to develop new ideas, new proposals, and hopefully will make a difference in our respective decision making. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to intellectually rich and gratifying discussion today.
Thank you, Professor Kortunov, for quite explicit opening remarks, and suggest that we now move to session one of our panel discussion, which is dedicated to new regional dynamics in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I'm very proud and glad to pass the microphone to Professor Riccardo Redaelli, a very dear friend and one of the best specialists in the region. Riccardo, please.
Thank you, Andrei. Thank you for the invitation and for the proposed discussion. Very briefly, because I mean, just some few bullet points. I would like to raise somehow interconnected and for giving food for the discussion. And the first bullet point is that the new centrality of the wider Mediterranean in the last, let us say, 10, 15 years, and in particular of the Eastern Med, which is an area with its own characteristic, but which is geopolitically close, interconnected with the Levant and the Gulf. It is a strange centrality in a way, because it's related to the changed political landscape of the last decades. Often it might be considered a negative centrality, in the sense this is the result of a series of crises, of battlefield for proxy wars among regional and international powers. And we had the rise of different movements of violent Islamic activism. We had in the last year the global jihad ideology, either of the Dawlat al-Islamiyya or other forms, which undermine the regional stability. We have the crisis of the long crisis of the post-First World War political architecture, political system in the Middle East. We have the increase of polarization and sectarianism within the Dar al-Islam. We have the military adventures by different external powers, the outbreak of civil wars, a revolt, a revolution, use the term. At the same time, it is also a centrality for the change within the diffusion of power at the geo-economic level. I'm thinking to the new commercial initiative, to the Road and Belt initiative. The Mediterranean has a hub as a terminal for Chinese infrastructural project for these new, very ambitious commercial corridors. We have the discoveries of natural gas and the others, which is transforming transforming the area. And that is the first, so a new centrality, sometimes negative, sometimes a positive one, but then the lights are now on the wider Mediterranean, especially on the eastern one. At the same time, a second bullet point is this region or this sub-region, this sub-security system suffers from severe dynamics of polarization and dichotomic approaches to security. We have the Cold War between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates from one side, and from the other side, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is reverberating on the region. We have the geopolitical shatter belt, the conflict within the Sunni Islam, with the supporter of political Islam, Turkey and Qatar, just to be very brief, and the supporter of different form of Salafism from the other side. And this polarization is not negative only per se, but because it has produced huge tension and favored the interference of other externally regional players, and with Russia probably being the most determinant and the most successful one till the moment. The use of proxies in local conflicts like Iraq, in Libya. It also, in some way, enlightened, emphasized two both negative effects. The first one is the miserable irrelevance of EU as a geopolitical actor and as a provider of security. All the crises in Libya and in Iraq demonstrate that the idea of having a common foreign policy of EU has sunk, has failed. We have an increased rivalry between EU member states, and that also we have the only state who has the power, the magnitude to assert some or force a geostrategic vision, that is to say Germany. Germany is totally unwilling to demonstrate to have a great geopolitical vision in long term connected with, at least with a hard security mechanism. And the second is that the region is still linked to the zero-sum game approach to security, and with the collapse of any form of collective security and an extremely cynical tacticism. Again, thanks to Turkey or to your countries' moves. The last bullet point, and then I conclude, and I want to take too much time, is the new Biden administration. I think that for Biden, the first priority is again some form of US strategy for the Middle East, which is seriously lacking, not only due to the Trump administration, but even during the last Obama one. It seems to me that in this area, they have two roads ahead. Biden has to select two possible ways. The first is the promise, electoral promise to go back to the JCPOA, to the nuclear agreement with Iran, and the second is the Abraham Accords, and going on this way. So the first one, going back to the agreement with Iran, is of course considered positive, but extremely unlikely one, because I do believe is a very hard promise to maintain, both because, as you know, the domestic dynamics within Capitol Hill, within the Congress and the Senate, the US Congress and Senate are traditionally anti-Iranians and extremely sensitive to some lobbies, the pro-Israeli lobbies, the pro-armament, the arms industry one, which of course wants to have closer relations with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And the second is also because in Iran has changed a lot. It's changed for the wars. The Nizam, the political system, the Iranian political system, has moved to the far, I don't want to use a right or left, but to the extreme, also as a consequence of Trump obsessive anti-Iranian posture. The second one, the Abraham Accords, whatever you may think, are a clear attempt to reshape the traditional architecture of the Middle East and intertwine with the two main games, the marginalization of Iran and possibly leading to the implosion of the Islamic Republic, the marginalization of the peace process, that is to say the Palestinian file, which should be, I mean, washed away from international diplomatic debate, and the marginalization of Turkey on the energy table of the Middle East. That's probably my bullet point. I would like probably to add my view. I led to a discussion also in the second part on Russia policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. Russia has been extremely able to get the best she can have from the Syrian crisis, from the Libya, but then is my question is, so what? And then what might happen? So you had tactical good results, but it seems to me that now you are reaching a point, then you have to take some decision in the region. Maybe we can discuss about that. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. As I hoped, we have now several points, challenging points to discuss during this panel. That's about the new centrality, which might be interpreted, for example, depending on the points of view of the discussant, might be interpreted as leaving the Eurocentric approach to the Mideastern-centric approach, or something similar to that. Of course, the polarization and security issues, which is, I think, probably the central issue in the Eastern Mediterranean and the whole of Mediterranean. Thank you for mentioning the new Biden administration. It looks as though we are going back to the 1960s, 1970s big game between America and the USSR in the attempt of making Mediterranean either the American lake or the Russian lake or whatever. That is also a point for the discussion. And I think that I'm very happy to ask Fedor Lukyanov to maybe start this discussion or maybe answer the challenge of Ricardo about the Russian long-term politics in the Mediterranean. Fedor, thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey. Thank you for this invitation, which I certainly don't deserve because I'm absolutely not a specialist on this area. So I'm not sure that I can, I'm qualified to challenge what Professor Rudela said. So I will do as I always try to do when I speak on issues which I'm not an expert in, to try to put it in a broader context and to try to see this regional and local development in the framework of changes and challenges we are facing at the global scale. So having said that, I would love to maybe challenge what Professor Rudela said, talking about centrality. I very much agree that this region is getting or already got to be much more central compared with what we had, say, 15, 20 years ago, of course. But central to what? Central to, as Andrey mentioned this Eurocentric view, the European view, central to the development as it, as we can see it looking from Europe. Russia is still part of Europe, so we look from this angle. While I would argue that this region, Eastern Mediterranean, maybe Mediterranean at large, is becoming more central while getting increasingly peripheral in global scale. Because we see that the whole international development is moving towards Asia Pacific, or Indo-Pacific as it is being renamed now more and more frequently. US, China, something. It's difficult to say yet what. US-China confrontation, US-China cooperation, US-China everything is becoming the most important element of the international politics. Of course, one can argue, and will be right, that Mediterranean is a very much important part of this equation as well, because if we look at big Chinese projects like New Silk Road or One Belt, One Road, they are all directed towards Europe and towards Mediterranean. In this regard, yes, but at the same time, I think strategically we can expect that the most important game, so great game, great gamble of the 21st century, will be played out not there, rather in a broader Asian space around Pacific and Indian Ocean. So in this regard, what will happen in the Mediterranean will indeed have profound impact on international developments, but rather as a supportive or instrumental part of this developments than the real centerpiece of conflicts and interaction. Second point, and I think this is pretty trivial already, we can see how so-called great powers or big states, however you call them, are relatively losing influence and capacity compared to local and regional powers, which are on the contrary gaining those capacities in particular situations, especially in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean. Yes, of course, Russia is there anymore, and Russian performance since 2014, 2015 demonstrated that Russia sees this area as a strategically important one. But this is rather an assumption, because if we look at other powers, outside powers, which traditionally played roles, important roles in the region, be it European powers or even the United States, they are rather shrinking, and they will be replaced not so much with Russia, but much more by countries playing their own regional games there. Of course, Turkey, first of all, but also you can see increased activities by basically all those powers who can do something, be it Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so on. And this is not just a coincidence. It seems to be the original reflection of the global trend. A more fragmented and less centralized and less universalist world is becoming the place where big powers can lose their ability to influence particular trends in different regions, while local actors having much less resources actually than United States or China or who else, but thanks to their physical presence in the region and thanks to their very deep commitment to particular goals, they can achieve actually much more than before. Point number 3, I think it's quite important now, and you can say people matters. People matter, and matter in a very practical and applied form. People matter as a tool. I mean, those refugee flows, which were generated by turbulent developments in Northern Africa and in the Middle East, turned into a political mean for particular governments. Certainly we think about Turkey in this regard, but not only. And of course, if we look at situation since this big wave of so-called Syrian refugees, 2015, so-called because of course we know now that a big part of those people were not from Syria. It was just a nickname for this big move. So since that, this is one of the most important elements of European EU's foreign policy which is inseparably interconnected with domestic policy. And we see this very complicated juncture and the conglomerate of problems which creates, as we see, enormous challenge to the European Union, challenge which is coming within, but which is being very much encouraged from without, from the outside. And Turkish leader, Mr. Erdogan, is, to put all moral things aside, is extremely skillful to use this instrument. Number 4, Trump policy has been mentioned here already. I think however we consider Trump and whatever we think now about his presidency, but just in the case of Middle East, his legacy will be much longer and much more enduring than any other areas, because what he did with reshaping and reformulating priorities certainly will not be changed by Biden administration or because the necessity for Israel and most important Arab countries to come to terms and to start to work together, that was obvious even before. And Trump was courageous enough, actually, to be very cynical and to push it. Trump or his son-in-law, I don't know who was the driving force. But what we see now is a completely different picture. And this picture, I cannot imagine Biden administration to encourage Gulf states to break ties with Israel anymore. So it will not change. And that means, first of all, of course, the completely different situation for Iran. And by the way, when we speak about JCPOA now, Biden is, at least he declares he is very much committed to this deal and wants to be back to that. But my question would be, in which form? Because after everything what changed in the region, and new relationship between Israel and Arab states, new relationship between US and several actors, how they can expect to just be back to the deal signed 2015? Certainly, this deal will require, to put it mildly, corrections. And the question is what kind of correction and how Iran will react to that. and of course, what Professor Rideli mentioned, this is a clear marginalization of the Palestinian issue. I am not a specialist on this, so probably my assessment is totally wrong and primitive. But my feeling is that all important actors in the region, since quite a long time, were in search of a reason why they should abandon this issue, because the whole situation was so much hopeless, without any prospect to find a solution. And now, okay, this terrible, awful Trump did this. Oh, poor Palestinians. So it's done. And most likely, the Palestinian issue will not be used by the government so much anymore. But the other question is to what extent it will be used by extremists and radical forces, the Islamists, because for them, this is a great issue to raise when they speak to, so to say, to the street, to Arab street, which certainly is not very happy about those deals with Israel. And final point, just to encourage discussion, Professor Rideli asked about Russian policy. So again, to be a little bit provocative, you ask what next? So yes, Russia managed to become an important actor, maybe one of the most important actors in the region. Alongside with Turkey, we see that one conflict after another, Russia and Turkey are facing each other. That's, by the way, quite surprising development. So who could imagine that 4 or 5 years ago? But still we see it, and now Southern Caucasus is added to this strange list. As for Turkey, yes, it's clear. Turkey is a regional power with enormous ambitions. But Russia, what next for Russia? And of course, if we look through the lens of previous periods, I mean the colonial period, Cold War period, and the post-Cold War period, the so-called liberal world order, then we should expect Russia, as United States did before, or as Soviet Union plus United States did even earlier, that Russia, after becoming such an important actor, will try to first to reshape the region, and second, to take responsibility for something. I would dare to argue that Russia has no idea to reshape this region, first, and secondly, Russia has absolutely no idea to take any responsibility, because not because Russia is so cynical, but because Russian leader maybe instinctively understands that there is absolutely no way to stabilize this region for a long time. And again, what I said in the beginning, great powers leverage on this is already now limited, and will be limited even more in the future. So for Russia, Syria in particular, but maybe some other conflicts there, Libya, are elements in attempts to increase Russian potential worldwide and the global scale, but not in order to be the new sultan or the new ruler of the Middle East, not at all. I guess that in years to come, we will see a profound transformation of Russian foreign policy at large, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere, including the post-Soviet area, by the way, which is the most important priority for all Russian governments since collapse of the Soviet Union. And Russian policy will be much more egoistic, much less, hopefully, much less emotional, much more calculated, and oriented towards increasing capacities in order to protect its own stability and security. So the idea about any mission, I don't know, any mission vis-a-vis other states will gradually disappear. Now we still have something, some remnants of the Soviet time or remnants of the pre-Soviet time, but it will go away. Whether it's good or bad, that's another discussion. But I guess that we will see a new prioritization in the future. Again, being pretty far away from this region, I would guess that Syria will inevitably remain a very important part of Russian strategic thinking for one simple reason, because as long as Russia is a player there, Saudi Arabia is interested to have a very fruitful conversation with Russia on important issues. I mean, first of all, the oil market and oil prices. So Saudi Arabia had no idea to discuss it with Russia before Russia demonstrated such a powerful performance in Syria. After that, they suddenly discovered that Russia matters. As for other elements of this picture, like Libya and many other conflicts, maybe Northern Africa or Central Africa, I guess that it will be more and more place for business, for those who are risky enough to try to play there. The Russian state will support those who are courageous, but will not take responsibility for them or for development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say that for a person telling each time that he's not a specialist in the Mediterranean, Fedor, you gave quite an ample analysis and view on the regional dynamics. And actually you posed very interesting issues as well, while also giving some answers to Professor Idaeli, and the issues of the new activism of Turkey, and not only Turkey, and new alliances that are forging in the southern littoral of the Mediterranean, which are going to influence further as we see that. And of course, the position of Russia. I have to say that I have an impression that not only Russia, but also the United States and the rest of the so-called developed world are actually sitting back and watching something new that is developing in front of their eyes on the southern shores of the Mediterranean, and trying very hard to decide what are we going to do in those new circumstances. Even the Abraham Accord, which you mentioned, I see that the results of the Abraham Accord is starting now already living its own life, independent of the instigator, which was Trump. That's a very interesting, indeed, discussion that was started, and I invite Massimiliano Trentin. Massi, I invite you to continue that discussion, and hopefully we will go back occasionally to answer some questions and to discuss in depth some final points. Please.
Thank you, Andrei. Me too. I'm just putting some bullets to discussion. And I'm going to review just some of the most relevant, I think, initiatives that tried to make sense of the Mediterranean in the last decade, and from this, just situating them within a broader and longer perspective, an historical one, if possible, and then might make some comments on what has been previously said. First of all, just since the end of the Cold War, in the 90s, basically the whole of the Mediterranean space has seen different projects that tried to integrate or find some, or building up some commonalities, standards across the region. And in the 90s, it was the time of European initiatives from the Barcelona process, European Euromed partnership. Then that was one of the few that tried to imagine and shape the Mediterranean as an integrated space. Then, by the end of the decade of the 90s, that initiative began losing some steam and was replaced by a series of other competing initiatives that, as a matter of fact, did not originate in the Mediterranean, but thought of the Mediterranean as instrumental or as a side area for what was the core of this project, and I mean here with the so-called axis of resistance, or an initiative that was meant to integrate the Middle East, first of all, as a space, as an autonomous space led by regional powers. First of all, of course, Iran, and 4 regional countries, an autonomous Middle East. And of course, since it stretched to Syria and Lebanon, it included the Eastern Mediterranean as well. But the Mediterranean was a side area compared to the core that was what we call conventionally as the Middle East. Then, more or less in the same time, there was another project, another initiative that started to gear, that was the one that was labeled as the Male Ottoman, because it was based on Turkey. Turkey, which is and has always been one of the major economic power in the region, in terms of GDP, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms even of quality of products, that because it was during the 2000s that we all know that Turkish products were second or third compared to European products in terms of quality, in terms of prices, and they made their inroads throughout the region. They build on the avenues of the so-called regionalization. And Turkey tried to, even thanks to Italians, with Qatar and the Qatari money, as well as avenues of influence built on the networks of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, displayed or devised a competing project for a Middle East and North Africa and the Mediterranean led by regional powers, and particular by Turkey. That was in competition, in rivalry with the one of Iran, partially yes, because it covered same spaces, same territories, but that was not much different in terms of the idea, the rationale behind it. A region led by those living within the region. And finally, the most recent initiative is the Abraham Accord or deal, whatever you might call it, that it is based on the Gulf monarchies and Israel. That was the basis. And here again, this initiative, which is taking its own life beyond the US, is, and I think that's very significant, because it originates in the Gulf. It originates in the Gulf. It is the product of the Gulf, much like, the axis of resistance, and that's quite a parallel, but stretches beyond, towards the West and towards the Mediterranean as well. And since it builds on much longer processes of convergence between Israel and the Gulf monarchies, I think that it will outlive whatever the US will decide upon. That's my impression. And this is important since it will oblige, will compel all other forces, actors from Turkey to Iran and their allies, as well as Europeans as well, to decide how to approach this new initiative. But the point here is that most of these initiatives, with the exception of the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership of the 90s, as a matter of fact, they all deny the unity of the Mediterranean as an integrated space, as a matter of fact. And this is much consistent even with the traditional Islamic conceptions of what was the Mediterranean, that was never conceived as an integrated or unitary space. Just look at the wars and the meanings they used to define this space, which is in line, as a matter of fact, with even the conception that prevailed during the Cold War, and in particular for the US. As a matter of fact, they never placed the importance, the relevance of the Mediterranean as much in line with what the British thought during the 19th century as the main avenue from the Atlantic to the Indies. That was important. That was the meaning. So Gibraltar, Malta, and then Suez. That was the point for them. But aside from this, there was not much of unitary understanding. And another point of more recent initiative is, I repeat, because I think that's important, even for the content and the meaning, and even the forces acting within the Mediterranean, was that most of these initiatives are basically centered on the Gulf. That is, they found the origins in the Gulf, and then they reverberate over the Mediterranean, which is just a long legacies of the processes that began during the 1970s that shifted the relevance of those territories from the Mediterranean, from the Arab-Israeli conflict towards the Gulf and the Arab-Iraq-Iran war, and then the rivalry between the Islamic Republic and the Gulf monarchies. And then a third element that combines a commonality between all these initiatives is that they are all security-based, security-driven, whose first and foremost priority is the defense of the territorial integrity and the autonomy in the decision-making process of those powers. So to have a say in the Mediterranean is just instrumental for the territorial integrity of Turkey, the autonomy of the decision-making in Iran, as well as in the Arab Gulf. So, as a matter of fact, there are all reasons to believe that the Mediterranean will continue to remain a space open to competition and rivalry. I think that there will, my impression is that the Biden administration, the new US administration, won't make much of a difference in terms of how the dynamics of the Mediterranean will change, or better, they will make the difference because they are heavyweights. But they will build on existing dynamics. They will not create new ones out of the green field. So they will build on something already existing, like it is the case of the Abraham Accord, whose dynamics are already there since a very long time in terms of convergence. And you can live for centuries with convergence without making into an open partnership or alliance. So there's no much problem with that. Which calls much into question now what the role might have Europe as well, and even a European actor like Russia is still, as a matter of fact. So if the centrality of the Mediterranean is questioned because the world is shifting in terms of production of wealth towards Asia and towards the Pacific, and I would argue much in Asia, more than Asia Pacific. Like it was the case during the late 19th century, or even during the Cold War, the Mediterranean is a kind of scale for world affairs. So if it is a periphery, what happens in that periphery will shape much the balance of power, the content of the projects and the standing and the legitimacy of international powers in other areas of the world. So if the Cold War was, the ultimate goal was Europe, and it started and ended in continental Europe, as a matter of fact, it was played hard elsewhere. And much of the content and the dynamics, the features, were shaped and played and changed even by peripheral areas. And I stop here just for the moment.
Thank you very much, Massi. Thank you for the ample and profound description of the topics under discussion. I think that more or less we have covered during the first session, we've covered the main issues under discussion, that is regional security and current competition and rivalries in the Middle East, and the prospects as well of new American administration and Russian politics, more or less, in the area. And we have a question from our viewers. The question is from Igor Matveyev, who is senior researcher in the Institute for Oriental Studies of the Academy of Russia. His question is addressed to the first speaker, Professor Redaelli, who mentioned Russia, I quoting the question, mentioned Russia taking a pause after all tactical achievements and facing a need to take some decisions in the Middle East. What kind of decisions do you mean, Professor? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I know which are the decisions Russia has to take. I'm not a specialist of Russian affairs. I'm working on the Middle East, so I see Russian from that angle. But if I connect also to Professor Lukianov remarks, and I do believe that the centrality is from our perspective, from an Eurocentric perspective, despite the fact even for China, East Mediterranean is becoming more important. And not only for the Silk Road Initiative, but in general, is Beijing considered Mediterranean the most important of the non-important areas. So it's growing up, at least as regions and medium level sites. So it is clear that when started all the sub-movement, all the political security earthquakes in the Levant and in the Mediterranean following the so-called Arab Spring, which is a term I do not like personally. In Syria, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and US, and more or less EU, despite the fact that the EU is always a bit puzzling on its own goals, we wanted, or they wanted, Al-Assad to go. Iran and Russia wanted Al-Assad to remain, and you won the game. With all the short-term and medium-term fallout that you demonstrate the technologies, Russian technologies, the capacity to hit also from far, a display of power. You mentioned Saudi Arabia, say, oh, we have to deal with Russia. You maintain your naval base, and that is important. Then in Libya for me appears to me more tactical than really strategic, in the sense that you still are against Turkey, despite the fact that the two presidents are trying to reach a sort of grand bargain on the area between Turkey and Russia, and maybe you are getting closer, but you are opposing Turkey. You are on the same front with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, to the point that a famous private company of security is paid by the Emirates to act as General Haftar protector in Libya. But then in Libya, you have been able to stop the collapse of General Haftar, a man who always failed in his move, always, since the 70s, 80s. But then I see, and so what? You in Syria, you won the war, but you are unable to pacify Syria, to reconstruct Syria. You basically, you don't have the money, and the international system is very hesitant to put the $400 billion necessary to build up Russia. So it's a problem to imagine a post-war Syria, what should be, because is a very still on the brink, winning the war, but then what? And in Libya, you saved Haftar from the collapse. I don't know if this is good or bad well, bad probably for Libya, because Haftar is the main problem of Libya, the solution. But I don't know if this is good for you, because then you have to reach a sort of an agreement. And then the more you become exposed in the Middle East, the more you become exposed in the Mediterranean, and the less is possible for your friends in Europe, and you have friends like, for example, generally the government of Italy, to support a less anti-Russian policy, European policy. That is to say, to find a mediation over Ukraine, over the political debate, human rights, and whatever. That's a point. The more you are exposed in the Middle East, the more you look as extremely successful, but also an extremely cynical power acting in the Middle East, and the more it's difficult inside EU, inside the European Union, to build up a less anti-Russian policy. You know that how the European Union policy is created, the pressure we have from some countries, especially from some Eastern European countries, to maintain a stronger posture, a bold posture. So my question is, that's why I say, and then what? To which point you can overstress, because Syria is extremely expensive, Libya less because the Arabs are paying for you, but still is political costly as a situation. And you had the South Caucasus. You didn't support Armenia, as a matter of fact, or very moderate way, in respect to the past. You can try to reach a grand bargain with Turkey. But reaching that in this moment will not support you inside the European Union. That's what the question. I don't have an answer. You know that professor paid for making questions, not providing answers. We are not paid enough.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much. Well, good and ample answer for the question, but the main conclusion I have for the answer is that there are some problems inside the European Union of decision making, and not that is not the Russian problem of decision making, which actually the problem is twofold. All right. So we've exceeded drastically the time allocated for our first section of discussion, and now I pass the flag to Ruslan to start the second session of discussion, and that is changing trends in the Eastern Mediterranean and regional actors. Ruslan, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chuprygin. That was a great session, I think. I would like to also ask some of our colleagues in the second sessions if we can continue or we need a break. How do you think?
Maybe just 5 minutes?
Yeah, we can have a break for 5 minutes and then continue. Yes, we agree with that. Okay.
Thanks.
So thank you very much, and I think that we can, take something and then come back in 5 minutes. I will be waiting here in 16:10. Thank you very much. So I think we could. I think we can start our next session. Yes, I hope that you hear me quite well. Again, I would like to mention that we had a very interesting previous discussion. We've covered many issues, and there was one that we could also start with our second panel discussion. It's about changing trends in the Eastern Mediterranean and the regional actors. We've already heard that there are limits for, I would like to say, like there are limits for the external actors while the local and the regional players are growing in their influence and their role in the Eastern Mediterranean and around. And here, definitely, we also talked about the dichotomies in the approaches to the regional security, and that is quite an interesting question. And I hope that we will start, and I hope that we could also discuss a bit deeply these questions which were raised earlier with our next distinguished speakers. I would like to bring in here the topic of, when we talk about the dichotomies in the regional securities, and when we talk about the influential actors in the Eastern Mediterranean and around, I would like to bring in here the role of one of the most maybe most significant actor, which could influence the positions of external actors, like, for example, US or Russia. And we've talked about that much. I'm talking about Turkey. And for that, I would like to ask Dr. Pavel Shlikov, who is a social professor at the Institute of Asian and African Studies at the Lomonosov Moscow State University and expert in RIAC. Pavel Vyacheslavic, could you kindly analyze bring your assessment of the current Turkey's foreign policy? And it was quite active during the last 2 2 or 3 years, and many people talked about the blue homeland doctrine. What do you think the prospects for this, for the future of this Turkish foreign policy activization? Are we going to have any limits for that, or still we'll have an interesting, game being played by Erdogan and the Turkish leadership? So could you kind of share with us your assessment of this story?
Well, dear colleagues, dear Ruslan, thank you very much for an opportunity to share my views and ideas on Turkish foreign policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. First question I think is what is driving Turkey's increasingly assertive Mediterranean policy. As Ruslan mentioned, we witnessed for the last 2 years and beyond. First factor, energy security. Ankara is undoubtedly keen on getting its share on the region's energy riches, and despite its recent gains in the diversification of natural gas imports, Turkey still suffers from energy import dependence, and its Eastern Mediterranean resources, even at limited volumes, would be a welcome addition to Turkey's gas portfolio. I think also Ankara long pursued the position of regional energy hub. We talked about it very much during the late 2000s, still is on the agenda, and this will probably, the requirement, I mean the ability to attract gas imports from multiple regions and the Mediterranean gives Turkey the clue to this being a new regional energy hub. Second point, second factor, geopolitical concerns and geopolitical ambitions of Turkey. And I think geopolitical consideration principally drive Turkey's Mediterranean strategy, Mediterranean policy, while competition that I mentioned over energy reserves and transit routes play, of course, a very important role. Still, its impact is mediated for the geopolitical dynamics of the region, very complicated dynamics. And I think that Turkey's Mediterranean policy could be interpreted as a response to these threats as Turkey perceived them, threats to Turkey's maritime sovereignty, and also as a product of so-called increasingly, I would say, perception among Turkish politicians of regional isolation, of regional encirclement. And this drives us to the third factor, I mean the recent shifts in regional alignments. And this recent shift in regional alignments demonstrate us the emergence of a very interesting regional bloc consisting of 4 countries, a very unexpected combination: Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt. And this new, I would say, regional Mediterranean world regional order has paved the way for the perception that Turkey is being excluded from this emerging new regional order. And in order to evade this geopolitical predicament, perception of encirclement, of isolation, Turkey has already adopted this strategy of forward defense. And this strategy relies on hard power. This strategy relies on assertive diplomacy, which Turkey thinks can extend control over areas to strengthen Turkey's position in the region, etc. And the recent developments in maritime delimitation issue, I think, had a distinct cumulative effect on current escalation. If we look on the situation in the duration of the last 20 years, we can evidently see this effect. For example, during the 2000s, a number of littoral states signed bilateral exclusive economic agreement delimitation agreements, and it was the first step in the preparation for hydrocarbon exploration in the region. In 2003, there was such an agreement between Republic of Cyprus and Egypt. In 2007, once again, Cyprus signed this exclusive economic zone deal with Lebanon. And in 2010, shortly before the discovery of the Leviathan gas field, Israel and once again Cyprus signed the same agreement. Ankara imposed all these steps, and Turkey wanted to create a multilateral approach, which Turkey thought will be much more appreciated within all littoral states, but failed to promote such a multilateral agreement. Turkey again started to sign and to track of signing maritime demarcation deals with its few remaining allies. Went on this bilateral track. In 2011, there was a continental shelf agreement between Turkey and Turkish Republic of North Cyprus. And the last step, there was an exclusive economic zone agreement between Turkey and a government of national accord in Libya, signed in the late 2019. So coming to one of the most important drivers for Turkey's increasingly assertive Mediterranean policy, that is, to my mind, geopolitical rivalry in the Mediterranean, which embodied in the very strange and complicated quadrilateral security and military partnership of Israel, Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt. And ironically, in the early 2010s, many expressed hopes that energy resources would bring not only prosperity to the region, but also will help to bring peace, to bring solution to the regional problems. And unfortunately, these expectations and dreams have failed so far today. Of course, shared economic interests succeeded in bringing closer such different states like Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt. Even we can speak about a sort of military alliance, if not alliance, but military and security cooperation, joint military exercises, some agreements on security issues, and each state has its own interest in the development of such cooperation. Israel, which had long kept its distance from the Republic of Cyprus since 2010, since that incident of Mavi Marmara, decided that it will be a good leverage, a good step to contain Turkey in the region. Greece and Cyprus welcomed closer relation with Israel as a means, once again, as containing Turkey in the region. And Egypt, it's a very interesting case. Egypt under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and decided that it will be also very instrumental for containing Turkey, and this provided additional impetus for this quadrilateral military and security partnership. And I think the last straw for Turkey last straws, I would say. Two recent things. The Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, established in early 2019, and the East Mediterranean Pipeline Accord. These two recent developments, Ankara considers both them as elements of a larger effort to box Turkey, to isolate to the emergence of the Mediterranean. And we can see a lot in the publication of both Turkish officials and Turkish think tankers that this created a sense of abandonment. By Western allies, and the fact that the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, the East Med Pipeline Accords, and a number of other regional initiatives are being supported by the United States and the European Union. All this further contributed to the conviction that Turkey is being sidelined by its previous Western allies. And coming to Turkey's reading of this geopolitical rivalry in the Mediterranean. On the one hand, there was a lack of regional allies for Turkey, which has left today. And Turkey, given the lack of regional possible allies, Turkey opted for increasing military capabilities to make the regional balance more favorable, but with other instruments, with other tools, and close cooperation among Greece, Cyprus, Israel, increased Turkish threat perception in the Mediterranean. And the Turkish military elite, part of Turkish political elite, started to emphasize that defending Turkey's interests in the Eastern Mediterranean, the highest priority for Ankara, and this would in turn necessitate greater power projection capabilities of the Turkish Navy. And now we come to this Mavi Vatan, or Blue Homeland doctrine. But before I shift to this last point, I want to stress that there are also a number of various domestic programs, military programs, which Turkey launched in the 2010s. For example, the naval warship project, Milli Gemi. And under this Milli Gemi, Turkey has developed at least 15 multi-purpose corvettes, frigates, which significantly extended Turkey's warfare capabilities in the Mediterranean, in Black Sea. And another one, the National Submarine Project, Milli Denizaltı Projesi. And this project aims to develop and build 6 modern submarines in Turkey by the end of 2030. So another one is a first amphibious assault ship, this Amfibi Hücum Gemisi, named Anadolu, which is planned to be constructed later this year. So it was also a cumulative effect of all these initiatives. On the top of these initiatives is located this Mavi Vatan, or Blue Homeland concept. Ironically, originally it was coined by Navy officer Amiral Cem Gürdeniz, which in the mid 2000s, in 2006 precisely. And later Gürdenis was arrested, was accused of having plotted the overthrow of government of the Justice and Development Party, was sentenced to 18 years, just imagine 18 years. And but in 2015, following this highly discussed pact that Erdogan concluded with this ultra-nationalist military elite against Gülenists, Amiral Gürdenis was freed and started his career as a TV star, because his concept is becoming more and more popular. Over the past 4 years, Blue Homeland doctrine has gained attraction both in decision-making circles and public discourse. I'd like to stress a few points with regard to this Blue Homeland doctrine. First, the people, ultra-nationalist officers, the authors of this doctrine, see it that Turkey needs to project power and establish supremacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the advocates of this Blue Homeland doctrine argue that the demise of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War, all this was ultimately the consequence of Turkey's inability to establish itself as a maritime power. So, in Amiral Gürdenis' reading of recent history, the Treaty of Sèvres of 1920, which partitioned what was left of the defeated Ottoman Empire, could be imposed because of the Ottoman Empire had never been a maritime power. And so Gürdenis stressed that Turkey had to consider these previous mistakes. And they also stress that now Turkey is facing a second Sèvres. And because of that, the Blue Homeland doctrine is not merely a maritime doctrine, but also maybe a ground foundation for national liberation, as it was, for example, the National Pact, Misaki-Milli. And they compare Misaki-Milli, this National Pact of 1920, which delimited the borders of future Turkish Republic and their Mavi Vatan, Projesi Mavi Vatan, Blue Homeland doctrine.
If I may just make maybe to be a bit other questions we should discuss within the Q&A session, maybe 1 minute max.
Yeah. I think my last point is that Turkey's claim to this maritime homeland inevitably invites confrontation, since the homeland, and it's very important to my mind, homeland is by definition is non-negotiable notion. And the proponents of the Blue Homeland are unequivocally opposed to exploring a diplomatic resolution to the Eastern Mediterranean disputes. According to the proponents of this doctrine, collision with Greece is ultimately inevitable, and it's very dangerous. It's, as Professor Redaeli stressed in his speech, zero-sum games which a lot of regional actors play today, unfortunately. And I think, but one thing very important that, to my mind, is too early to conclude that Blue Homeland has become the official national security doctrine of Turkey. Of course, we have this very strange statements made by the National Defense Ministry in the early August of 2020, I mean this year, which stressed the importance of Male Ottoman, this blue homeland. But I think it's still too early to conclude that it has become the official national security doctrine, or part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Shlikov. I think that we've heard a very comprehensive analysis of Turkish perception and Turkish Male Ottoman doctrine. It's also, I think, it's interesting for the last year or two because it's mostly discussed within the analytical community. But moreover, what is interesting for us today, for today's discussion also, is that many observers believe that Turkey has not just been sidelined previously by its own allies, by regional actors in the energy projects in the Eastern Mediterranean, etc. But Turkey also tries to reach out to other players and influences other players for them to to play its own game. And you name it. It could be a Turkish game, Matrakçı. It could be checkmates. It doesn't matter. But it could be chess. But still, Turkey is trying to engage other partners. And here comes such partners as Russia or different other European players. I think that on the European part, definitely most of them are. I mean, at least it seems that most of them are in a contradictional way, of understanding of the Turkish actions in the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. And here comes my question of for the European, European approaches toward the security in the Eastern Mediterranean and how to deal with the different significant regional actors like Turkey. If I could, I would like to, join to our discussion. I bring into our discussion Dr. Elena Alexeyenkova, who is the senior research fellow and the head of the Center for the Italian Studies in the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Sciences, but also she is a RIAC expert and associate professor at the High School of Economics. Dr. Alexeyenkova, how do you see the European angle of the story as well? And also, I would like to maybe ask you, could you kind of also make some, Russian focus in it? So how it all plays around. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I will try to fulfill this mission. First, I would like to present some general assessments on the challenges that this Turkey's new politics in the region created for Europe, and how these challenges may further reflect on Russia and Europe relations, and Russia and so-called collective West relations. First, I would like to say that I will mostly concentrate on three ongoing conflicts and on escalation of these conflicts. First is Turkey-Greece conflict on maritime borders, Cyprus dispute, and Libyan conflict. I would like to stress three most important points in my view. First is that, of course, this new Turkish politics provoked a deep crisis in EU-Turkey relationship. And as a result, we can face and we see that both the EU and NATO are split now inside on the issue of what to do with Turkey. Besides Turkish politics, sharpened conflicts and conflicting priorities between different countries inside the EU, such as, for example, Italy and France, concerning Mediterranean, Libya, and Turkish politics. They have different views on that, as well as French and German tensions over the leadership of EU foreign and defense policy. We evidenced a lot of rhetoric coming from France, questioning NATO, questioning Turkey's politics as NATO's member. And of course, this Turkey's assertive or so-called expansionist politics is the main headache of the EU at the moment. What does this mean for Russia-European relations and for Russia? From my point of view, I think that this conflict, new stage of conflict between Turkey and the EU is of course detrimental for both Russia-EU relations and for Russian politics in Syria, for example, as well, because Russia, as far as I understood, still hopes that Russia and Europe could cooperate in the reconstruction of Syria. Now we face the situation when all the partners, all Russian partners in Astana format, Turkey, Iran, and Russia, have very serious grievances and contradictions with the EU. This means that this Russia's idea of cooperation in Syria and on Syria's reconstruction is becoming less and less feasible and almost unreal in the nearest and middle-term perspective. Another point is that narratives also mean a lot in EU-Turkey dispute, and Russia is more and more involved into this dispute, despite the fact that Russia maybe would like to avoid this involvement. Turkish behavior this year seems, while reading, for example, Western media or Western expert articles, it seems that they somehow perceive Turkish behavior quite similar to that of Russia since 2014, when Moscow started to publicly articulate its national interests and to claim for so-called equal rights to defend its sovereignty and interests. The narratives are quite similar, and they seem quite similar to me, despite different ideological bases. In both cases, the behavior of Russia and Turkey, they are sometimes interpreted as a result of national humiliation and unfair attitude of European partners, first to Russia and now to Turkey. And this made some European capitals think that Moscow supports Turkish so-called expansionist politics in East Mediterranean. For Moscow, I would say that this is quite an inconvenient situation. As soon as, on the one hand, Moscow has to follow its previous discourse and its permanent, I would say, discourse on sovereign rights and the right to defend national interests. And somehow Russia has to demonstrate that it understands Turkish attempts to follow and to pursue its national interests. But on the other hand, it becomes more and more clear that Turkish national interests can and do contradict Russia's national interests in different places, be it Libya or be it now Nagorno-Karabakh. And besides, the support for Turkey's action would be detrimental for the open support, would be detrimental, of course, for Russia-EU relations that are already almost at the bottom. So now here Russia is in between these two conflicting sides, and Russia is not ready to pick any side of this conflict, evidently. Another issue, looking at the recent dynamic in the region, another issue is that Mediterranean is again, after some speculations on US withdrawal from the region and so on, but now Mediterranean is again becoming a kind of old new theater of Russia-NATO growing competition and tensions. The recent facts confirm this idea. I mean, the US initiative on Eastern Mediterranean Energy and Security Partnership. I mean, lifting Cyprus military embargo. I mean, new cooperation agreements with Greece and Cyprus, and the recent sanctions on Turkey on buying Russia's S-400. Of course, the dynamic is not positive at all for Russia-NATO relations in the region. And the third point, general assessment that I would like to make, that the new alliances in the region that are definitely much more complicated than several years ago. These new alliances mean for Russia that it becomes more and more difficult to follow the strategy of so-called equidistance that Russia tried to pursue according to many regional players. But at the same time, the option of non-taking sides, non-picking sides, and not making a choice, become really more and more hardly achievable for Russia. The level of escalation is already quite high to keep silence. But of course, in this situation, this is detrimental, first of all, for Russia's economic interests in the region, because so far Russia tried to keep the open as much possibilities as possible for the economic involvement in the region. But in case Russia has to choose the side, of course, it will immediately narrow the possibilities for the economic involvement into energy projects in the region or any other type of economic activities. And of course, that is a difficult choice for Russia. That is in quite difficult economic conditions. What do we see in the EU? What attempts we see to influence and to de-escalate the conflicts and the situation in the Mediterranean? We see here three, I would say, three main approaches: that of Germany, another one of France, and Italy, of course, is historically and traditionally also quite an influential actor in the region. Several words on these three approaches. Germany is perceived, I would say, like the most neutral actor in the region. That is trying to somehow relaunch the confliction mechanisms between Greece and Turkey and Cyprus, in Cyprus situation. But Germany is not involved in any energy disputes in the region. Germany is not involved in Libyan situation. I mean, it did not pick any side of the conflict, as for example, France or Italy. And of course, Germany has chances to influence the situation, but as it was said in the first part of our discussion, Germany is quite reluctant to take some concrete steps, taking into account the close economic and other types of relations between Germany and Turkey. France, of course, is the main antagonist to Turkey across all the conflicts in Eastern Mediterranean, and France openly sided with Greece and Cyprus, participated with military exercises, formally requested membership of this EastMed gas forum, and openly questioned Turkey's reliability as a NATO's member and a European partner. But France, as a representative of the most radical approach, of course, I would say it it does not meet enough support inside the EU, and the French approach, I mean, using sanctions and political and other types of pressure on Turkey, is not quite popular in the EU as far as I see. And the third approach, the approach of Italy, is as well a kind of trying to mediate and to play a balancing role. But Italy is resisting to pick side in the conflict. I would say more or less like Russia, Italy is still refraining from making some concrete movements. Italy has very deep economic relations with Turkey, and for example, if we assess the trade relations, Turkey is the amount of trade with Turkey is equal to the trade of Italy with Cyprus, Egypt, and Greece together. So, of course, from the economic point of view, Turkey is very important for Italy, and Turkey just recently invested a lot in one of the Italian Mediterranean ports. And they have some projects on transport and infrastructure and maritime routes in the Mediterranean. So, of course, Italy would not like to lose such a partner, but while analyzing Italy's former foreign policy steps, we see that Italy will hardly take a position confrontational to the general position of the EU or general position of the United States. Of course, Italy is still, I would say, perceived itself as a kind of middle power and is not ready to take steps. But of course, looking at the recent publications, expert publications in Italy and in Italian media, of course, they have growing resentment, I would say, towards this Turkish politics, especially in Libya, because there are some quite bright examples and cases that are disappointing for Italy, such as, for example, Turkey now uses several vessels that Italy sailed to Libya several years ago. Now Turkey uses these vessels to deal with migrants. And besides, Italy is, and the whole Europe now maybe is a kind of, and will be a kind of hostage of Turkish politics in the field of migration, not only on Turkish-Greece border, but in Libya as well. As soon as Turkey now is more capable to control these migrant flows than France or Italy.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm coming to the conclusion. Just a few recent remarks. Just general ideas that, of course, this new escalation in Eastern Mediterranean is a sort of testing for European common defense and foreign policy. But here comes, I would say, the main question, looking at what Turkey does in Mediterranean. Europe Europe faces the main question. I would say this question is whether real politics and military power will prevail over the liberalist idea of interdependence and diplomacy or not. So this is a kind of testing for these two approaches: concrete involvement on the ground, or long-lasting negotiations and diplomacy. And I would say that in some countries, as Italy, for example, there is an opinion already that realpolitik and military power can decide problems faster and more effective than long-lasting negotiations. So the idea appears, on my point of view, that Europe failed in this competition of approaches. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just a kind of self-reflection. But let's see in the future. But for Russia, this is also a very important question. Will we be able in the future to keep this strategy, to follow this strategy of equidistance, and will we be able to abstain from taking sides in the future, or this politics is already irrelevant? So I would like to stop here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Alexeyenko. I think that we really had, we are coming to very interesting points, and all the recent remarks that you made when I, joined and wanting to, making your presentation a bit, coming to the end. But the recent remarks were also important, and they were coming, from the whole presentation you made. Thank you very much. Definitely, I think that we should continue our discussion in this way, and somehow maybe also I would like to bring here Chiara Lovotti, who is also researcher within the Faculty of History in the University of Bologna and Associate Research Fellow at the Mina Center of Institute for International Political Studies, ISP, in Italy. Chiara, I would like to also ask your view, ask about your view and your analysis on practically maybe rivalries within the EU and the EU general or common policies towards the Eastern Mediterranean. We've just heard from Dr. Alexeyenko that there is a competition of approaches in the Eastern Mediterranean, and she also mentioned that maybe the EU has lost this competition of approaches from the beginning. Maybe I'm a bit radical, but I would like to be a bit provocative in this sense. What is your analysis of this situation? It is also important to us, I think, especially in Moscow, because we are coming to the same questions of whether our policies, I mean, the Russian policy or the EU policy, was effective enough for the last 5 years. Maybe something should be reconsidered. I know personally that there are views coming from Germany, coming from Italy, less from France, but France is coming a bit in another direction of reconsidering, or at least thinking of new prospects for and new approaches in the US policies towards the region. How do you see that?
Yeah, thank you, Ruslan. and Vishka for having me over. Always a pleasure. Are you listening to me? Do you hear? Okay, because I just got connection unstable mark. If anything happens, Ruslan, tell me. Changing trends, and this is always difficult to evaluate situations as they are evolving, and especially even more difficult to make foresights for the future, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean region, where issues are so many variables exist. But I will do my best to describe briefly the context and the main fault lines of the era, and then, as you suggest, maybe I will go more in detail on the EU so far inconsistent foreign policy over the era, and maybe its relations with Russia. So in the Eastern Mediterranean, we know it, a scramble is underway between countries in the region to access that Shlikov was describing, and even more since the 2010s. The discoveries of abundant gas reserves have nurtured tensions between regional players and in the region, and we know it. We have been saying this. On one side, we have Turkey that has been conducting unilateral explorations, drilling operations in the waters that fall beyond. And on the other side, we have Eastern Mediterranean in cooperation to leverage gas reserves in the area, increasingly up to the creation of the so-called Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum that was mentioned before, which sees the participation of Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt at first, Italy, Jordan, and Palestine, and will be joined if this will ever happen in next year, 2021, by France. So this looks really like a big economic, and it is, but as always, as often happens, economic interest, geopolitical ambitions, and as far two are the main political dynamics really behind this cooperation, this economic interest. Is the Cyprus dispute, what define as the ensemble of regional rivalries in the Middle East, which reflect in the Eastern Mediterranean region. As for the Cyprus dispute, very briefly, that is really, speaking of a new centrality of the Mediterranean, that is really a decentrality of centrality, if you wish. Frozen conflict ongoing since over 40 years, which sees the long-standing opposition between Greece and Cyprus on one and Turkey for the part of the island, therefore contended and the maritime claims and the rights to explore those waters. Why do I say that this hides behind economic interest? Because clearly there is no doubt, or few doubts, that Greece and Cyprus over the last few years have sought to leverage undersea gas reserves of the East Med Gas Forum to improve their own political standing in the region, and to alliance, which would eventually be at the expenses of Turkish influence in the area. And as for the second point, the regional rivalries from the Mediterranean, reflecting in the Mediterranean, that polarism that Professor Redaelli was mentioning before reflects in these Eastern Mediterranean dynamics as well. In this case, too, there is no doubt that regional players like Israel, Egypt, and even the United States, all of whom have with Turkey have joined this cooperation of the gas forum for similar reasons, which is to expand the influence and to counter Turkish influence. So the reason is that somehow a front of forces has been defining and lining up, which takes the opposite side of Turkey, because in this cooperation framework, clearly the clear absent is Ankara. And I don't want to say that cooperation framework between European powers and these countries we mentioned before in the Eastern Mediterranean was established precisely to exclude Turkey or to establish a club of anti-Turkey friends, but it was largely perceived so by Ankara, and that's the problem. And this is really the fault line that has been the real game changer, as far as I see it, not being an expert of Turkish foreign policy actually, but that has been, in my view, the real game changer of the Eastern Mediterranean affairs over the last 2 years. And in fact, Turkey has been feeling surrounded by hostile enemy or hostile forces, its core interests. Turkey has the longest contiguous coastline in the area, yet it feels it has little room for action or little room for legal action in the area. And indeed, it's not a coincidence that it responded with escalation, increasing its military presence in Libya, signing the agreement that was mentioned before between Ankara and the Tripoli, by deploying naval expeditions to explore gas in the areas, in the waters claimed by the Republic of Cyprus, and even chasing away ships operating under the Republic of Cyprus license. Problem if we are called to talk about changing trends. The problem is that Turkey is not likely to change that pattern that much, I think, not very likely to move steps back. From an economic perspective, it's difficult to imagine Turkey, given its difficult economic situation, to give up on potentially lucrative adventures over the waters in that area around Cyprus. And from a political perspective, it is also difficult to imagine Turkey making concessions in that part of the sea where other disputes exist, because that would contended area between Turkey and Greece. So when it comes to the European Union, of course, this new geopolitical front in the at the doorsteps of the EU has caused serious concerns to Brussels and European countries, which really urge Brussels better attention and to play some role. The EU done so far, someone said, Professor Darelli said before, talked before of miserable irrelevance of the European. We should admit that perhaps the only action that was really taken by the EU, and when I say EU, I mean really EU institutions, was to repeatedly condemn adventures as illegal. And then, yes, of course, instrument of foreign policy, of soft containment through sanctions, whose concrete results are all to be evaluated, and not only in the East Med, but in many other areas like Syria, for instance. But don't get me wrong, it is obvious for the EU, it is normal that the EU defends the sovereignty of Cyprus, Turkish action. I'm not saying that it should do the opposite, of course, but also because the EU recognition of Cyprus as the only legal authority in the area is really of Brussels legal policy in the region. But what I'm saying is that this approach towards Turkey, which excludes completely Ankara from the Mediterranean so far, paid off. Why? We said this partially it contributed to this escalation of the Cyprus issue, not escalation maybe, but further freezing of the Cyprus issue. Second, it partially contributed to push Turkey to look at other partners in the comes the agreement. And third, it paved the actors like the United Arab Emirates to get more deeply involved in the Mediterranean, which is something that should cause yet some other concerns to Brussels, not if not for the open front that the United Arab Emirates have in support of one side of the Libyan conflict, but also for the United Arab Emirates being so entrenched in those Gulf rivalries that we were discussing before, which is not really a good idea to bring into the Mediterranean. And then there is also the risk, of course, that increasing mistrust between the EU and Turkey will not perhaps compromise the Brussels-Ankara deal on migration, but maybe it will not help to run it smoothly. So to answer the question that I was given for this presentation, which is there a need for a change within EU policy towards the Eastern Mediterranean? Yes, I definitely think so. There is no doubt that the EU needs a more functional relationship, especially with Turkey in this area. This is fundamental to protect its core interests stemming from migration to energy policies to the broader security framework, whatever this means, in the Middle East and North Africa. But how to change that, it's difficult. There is no easy answer, but probably the by initiating a constructive dialogue with Turkey, a few important issues are the Cyprus dispute. First, the exploration, speaking of explorations, of new avenues and paths to extend, open up to dialogue, if really this Medgas forum will ever exist, to include Turkey in at least in dialogue about that. And third, in really linking up to Libya, remembering that and regarding Libya are really interconnected. Is that very often this is really a curse of the European. The fact of being so divided among different national perspectives. To speak with us, not even speak would be step number 2, to think with a single mind. And Professor Alexienkova explained better before about the different approaches of France, Germany. One idea perhaps some European think tank, I don't remember which one, was if there is a European actor that should take the lead towards possible negotiations in the Mediterranean affairs, this should be someone who has a lesser stake in the region than others. So clearly not Greece, not Cyprus, not France, not Italy, maybe Germany. And Germany did try to do that in Libya specifically. We remember the Berlin conference. Yeah, the problem is that the willingness then, of course, of any political and one could go more in detail about what should be done, but
Chiara, if I may, I'm sorry, but maybe 1 minute we can also give you to make some conclusions.
Okay, thank you, thank you so much. The EU could take the first regarding the Cyprus issue. It would be to lower the. It's not like we should find the final solution of the conflict right now, immediately, but perhaps we should work, you should work on the recognition of some of the Turkish claims around the rights of the Turkish Cypriots to the region's energy reserves. Of avenues to extend the Medgas Forum participation to Turkey. That is also a difficult one, but it is also clear that the current configuration of the agreement for now so perhaps aiming to explore ways for to give Turkish access to regional gas networks and in the region, and I think, yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chiara. It was really interesting. I especially the points on EU-Turkey relation, that it should be somehow restored, and there should be some constructive dialogue. It's interesting how you mostly pointed in this way, while we have other players, I think, that who also should be mentioned in bit. I would like to maybe bring our next expert, Grigory Lukyanov, who is a senior lecturer at the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs at the High School of Economics, and also a researcher with the Center for Arabic and Islamic Studies of the Institute of Oriental Studies, and RIAC expert. Grigory, we've mentioned earlier, and speakers talked about Turkish role, role of the European countries. We even talked about Russia. But as far as I understand, most of the discussions were a bit in the absence of the Arab countries, while they are important players there. We definitely mentioned some of the Arab states, but never touched upon the strategies of those particular Arab states. Maybe maybe this is somehow our our bad approach, but mostly most of the discussions within the Western think tanks, they are around the Western policies and Western perceptions of what are the policies of the Arab states. So here I would like to ask you about the maybe one particular conflict where we clearly see the significant and growing role of the Arab states, those in the Gulf and those around that particular conflict. It's Libya. When we discuss Libyan conflict, we always say about Americans, Turkey, Russia, EU, but in the end we come to conclusion when we go deep. We come to conclusion that there are Arab states which are also influencing this situation? And here, do you see some changing trends when we come back to the topic of this session? Do you see changing trends in the Arab world in the context of the Libyan conflict? Maybe you could put it, maybe we could put it this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruslan. Thank you, colleagues. I suppose nobody had mentioned paid much attention to Arab states before, only because you didn't ask them about it. I'm sure that every expert before me could say a lot about Arab interest and Arab-specific approach to Mediterranean region and security in this region, in the eastern part of this region. So. Thank you, and it's a real pleasure and honor to have a possibility to talk anything, to add anything about the situation after my colleagues have already done it, have already described the situation in details. It's very comfortable for me from this point, but I also have apologies that if I will repeat some things, some theses that have already been mentioned before. So yes, you asked me to pay attention to Libya, but I will start from some trends which have been mentioned. I will add some Arabic approach, Arabic specific from Arab states point of view, I suppose. First of all, I wanted to mention that a thesis that have already was described by Pavel Shurikov about militarization. Not only Turkey's approach is become more militarized. If we will follow the situation in Egypt, in Algeria, for example, we will see that both these two main states in the Mediterranean region, of course, Algeria is the Western Mediterranean, of course, but we can see that both these states they are developing and they strengthening their naval forces, and we can see the continuing of policy of military bases making in this region. So we talk about possibility of Turkish military presence in Libya. And also we in Russia, we have sometimes some talks, some analysis about the possibility of Russian presence in Libya, for example, or in Egypt, for example. And also we can't forget about the last idea of Russian military presence in Sudan. It's not so far from Eastern Mediterranean, if you can say it, for example, but it's also important to understand some points of Russian approach to this situation, to this region. From my point of view, it's rather clear that in Russia, Libya, for example, Libyan conflict is not completely imagined as a part of Eastern Mediterranean, because from Russian point of view, it's also part of Africa. And Russian approach to Africa is quite differs from Russian approach to Middle East, for example. And very often for last months or maybe for last 2 years, we can compare Russian approach in Libya, for example, with Russian approach, Russian policy towards Central African Republic, for example, or Russian approach to Mali, for example, to Mozambique, and so on. In this case, a very comparable number of instruments, very comparable number of principles, and also maybe some kind of comparable number of goals which Russia wants to get from these states, from its presence in these states. And in this case, when we talk about Russian needs in this region, we talk about Russian needs of access to the seas. I want to compare in such case situation in Eastern Mediterranean from Russian point of view with the situation in the Red Sea region. In this case, Russian main idea is being in this region, but not making hegemony on this region. Russia, I agree with my colleagues who have mentioned that there is no interest for Russian elites to be some kind of regional policeman or regional actor who will play the role of United States here. So it's important for Russia to have some kind of instrument to influence the situation or to show its ability to influence the situation. In this case, when we talk about Russian presence in Syria, we, of course, we talk about the possibility of Russian and European Union cooperation in supporting the rebuilding of Syria, but also we shouldn't forget about Russian military presence on the bank of Syria. So Tartus military base. And in this case, when we talk about Russian presence in Libya, we can't say that Russia is very active on the south of this state, for example, but it's rather active on the coast, Mediterranean coast, and its needs only are on this coast, no more, no less. Especially it's comparable with the situation in Sudan. Russia doesn't need and doesn't want to be responsible for peace reconciliation in these states, but it can use the situation as other actors do and did before it, use the situation for its own purposes, for its own vision and own goals. When we talk about Arab states and Libyan case and Arabs' perspective, I would say that yes, Libyan conflict show us the evolution of alliances or alliance-making policy. But now I suppose we can see that there is no perspective of such a kind of alliance thinking, alliance perspective. Such kind of alliance of supporters to Khalifa Haftar and LNA forces in Libya of United Arab Emirates, Egypt, France, or Russia maybe. It's not very clear, it's not official, it's not, there is no any specific agenda on this alliance. It's only specific situation for time, not very short time, I suppose. And I also wanted to argue some thesis from Professor Ricardo Hedeli when he mentioned that Haftar is the main problem of Libya. I can't agree because from my point of view, Haftar is only the top of iceberg. It's only the top, but not the basis of these problems. When we, if it was before, when our American colleagues and partners mentioned that the main part of Libyan problem in international relation, it is Gaddafi. Gaddafi is a problem. Nowadays, we can see that it was an illusion. And nowadays, we have an illusion that Haftar is only the problem. We have different clashes in Libyan society, different conflicts inside it, which are connected with different conflicts outside of Libya and inside of it. And Haftar is only one actor who played on these conflicts, who played on this sphere. It's very important to understand. If we want to do anything in Libya, we should understand that that Haftar is only one of the figures, not the main and not the last and not the least of it. I suppose when we talk about Russia, the Haftar is not the main partner for Russia. He's not the only partner of Russia. Yes, we can talk about bad reputation. Yes, we have some kind of image of Russia in Libya, and nowadays it's not very good. It's very bad. And of course, for most of Libyans, especially on the west on this state, Russian access, it is access of support to Haftar, Libyan National Army. And of course, after the situation this summer, when the forces of Government of National Accord has liberated a big part of coastline and get to the Siirt-Jufra line. We have a situation when Russia, like United Arab Emirates, like France, like Egypt, they helped Haftar to save his position. They helped, not especially Haftar, they helped the forces on the east of the state to save their positions. In this time, these states didn't give an opportunity to change the conflict in Libya in general. The Government of National Accord has an opportunity to not finish the war, but finish the war with Haftar. But some states in the region didn't give them such an opportunity. Why? Because it's still perfect instrument. Haftar, or maybe the Parliament of Representatives in South, and this bilateral model of Libyan conflict is still much more useful than anything which can be on its place. In this case, it's important to understand that, in my opinion, that we have some kind of interaction and interpenetration of conflict zones in this region, and because of it, a lot of states in region prefer to save these zones, to try to frozen them. In this case, we have some new dimensions from the point of view of Arab-Israel conflict. Ruslan asked me to think about what can be the influence of Arab-Israel conflict changes on the situation in Eastern Mediterranean, especially for example, for Libya. We have situation in Morocco and Algeria relations, when Morocco has recognition from United States of its being in Western Sahara. In this case, Morocco was one of the main sponsors of Libyan negotiations for last few months. And in this case, the Algerian approach to this can be changed after this situation in Western Sahara. We could see that Algeria supported the peace negotiations. It supported Government of National Accord before, but maybe some position of Algeria can be changed. I suppose it's not, maybe it will not lead to some great new conflict, but something can be changed. It can be important when we talk about such a conflict like Libyan conflict. And also we have situation in Ethiopia, for example, with its conflicts in Tigray, and also we have the problem in relationship between Ethiopia and Egypt. For Egypt, the Ethiopian problem was the main, in my opinion, the main reason why Egypt didn't send its troops to Libya, for example. Because there is such an understanding from my point of view that Turkish showed to Egypt before last year and during this year that using military force it can be a good solution for solving that problems that couldn't be solved by negotiations with global actors like United States, for example, and regional actors. In this case, the Egyptians strengthened their forces. They are strengthening their naval forces. They built another military base not far from the border with Libya. In this case, it doesn't mean that we should wait for a new war or military operation, but the possibility of such scenario is growing from year to year. And this is the result of weak legal statuses and integrity in the region of Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, in Red Sea, and it make me possible to talk about some kind of a special type of geopolitics of sea spaces. It quite differ from geopolitics of land. And for Russia approach, I think it's very important to understand. And I see that Russia can talk with these regions in comparison. So geopolitics of Red Sea, geopolitics of Eastern Mediterranean region, it can be of geopolitics of being on the coast, not going inside the continent. It especially, I suppose, it is the same like European states can do, I suppose. Maybe it's some kind of sphere for thinking. So maybe I can stop here because 15 minutes I have already was talking. So thank you. Thank you, Ruslan.
Thank you very much, Grigori. I think that the last points you made on the geopolitics of the sea spaces, and having that in the thinking of a number of states, especially as we heard from Dr. Shlikov earlier with the Mavi Vatan strategies. I think that particular approach is one of the issues that we should keep in mind for the future, because even if you would take that, we clearly see not even zero-sum game, as was in the very beginning of this meeting, mentioned by Dr. Redaeli, but we have some powers who really want to change this zero-sum game and into something that would be win for them and zero or lose for every others. And in this sense, I think that the only power we never we talked only a bit, and this is one of the interesting powers in the Eastern Mediterranean is definitely the United States. We've talked about them in the first session, but we didn't talk about the United States much during this session. But I think this also, tells us something. Definitely, that was a plan. That was a plan from the beginning. When Grigori mentioned that we never talked about Arab states because I never asked previous speakers about that. That was the plan to talk about Turkey, then move towards EU-Russia angle, and then to the Arab states. And thank you, Grigori, for doing that. Here, I think that we've covered many questions. Though we have a common question from, again, Igor Matveyev, who is we mentioned him earlier. He is the Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Oriental Studies. And he asks our Italian colleagues, I think that Chiara, as the only Italian colleague in this session, could help us with that. His question is, what is Italy's position toward the dichotomy of the Syrian political process with the Syria's economic reconstruction? Namely, what concrete developments within the Syrian constitutional process are desirable for Italy in order to initiate a real activation of Italy's participation at the economic reconstruction in Syria? While I understand that this is also much about the EU's policies, but could you kindly share your view on that? Maybe we would take one point of view coming from the Russian participants and move towards conclusions, because the time is running out. Chiara?
Yeah. Because me that my connection is stable. Does it work better with my video off? Okay, so sorry, it's not very nice, but at least you hear me. Not very nice. Thank you for this interesting question. This person trusts Italian politics very much. I'm not sure there is such a deep reflection among Italian institutions on what really is needed for the next phase of the Syrian war. But really, thank you to this research fellow for his trust in us. I think it's Italian politics at this point more or less aligns with European policies, as you were suggesting, Ruslan. And this is, however, a very good question, because the point of Syria's reconstruction is a huge topic. It's really, it is really the next phase of the Syrian conflict, and it brings all topics. So I this researcher for asking this, which is the possibility of cooperation between the EU meant as institutions and European countries with Russia, which clearly is over Syria, which clearly is one of, if not the main actor. I say that right now it sounds like more of an illusion, but why do I say this? Because at the end of the day, the interests of the EU and European countries and the interests of Russia now in Syria are in terms of reconstruction, they are very similar. So the war is waging down, let's move to the next phase. Although they are, they differ on some substantial matters. So for the EU is reluctant to engage in reconstruction with Assad, because that would mean reconstructed Assad Syria would mean empower this regime even further. Russia is also willing to construct, but also to do that, but for another reason, which is the possibility to. So same interests, different, but do you hear me?
Not that good.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do about that. This is the room in the house where the connection works best. So sorry, but so Russia could not being able to lacking economic resources should now really decide whom to empower in terms of reconstruction. And an opening to Europe, the EU and European actors could be beneficial to Moscow in this sense. But given the firm stance of the EU and European countries, which is we do not support reconstruction until Assad doesn't make concessions, Russia in this sense could use its power in Syria to put gentle pressure on Assad to make some of these concessions that are required by the European Union and European countries. And I'm thinking particularly, for instance, of refugees return through safe corridors, or some advancement on the Constitutional Committee works, or the situation of detainees, and many other points. Yes, the issue of reconstruction is big and requires a coordinated effort between the main foreign power in Syria right now, which is Russia, and other countries. And clearly, surely, these should be European countries, as far as I see it. I hope I was speaking very slowly. I hope you heard something.
Yes, thank you, Chiara. Yes, it was. We heard you well. I think that just to be maybe comprehensive and precise, I would like to ask also Massi on this issue, Massimiliano on this issue, just for what, 2 minutes, if possible.
Yes. I just wanted to make my short point on the issue. History is full, is plenty of lessons not learned. That's for sure. But if we look retrospectively to some of the basic points that sustained Syria after independence, and even since the 70s under Hafez al-Assad, was the fact that Syria was able to combine within its international relations the whole, or most at least, of the plurality of its demographic and the social components. That is because, as a matter of fact, if you look at more comprehensively from an economic point of view, as well as from a political and security point of view, as a matter of that country retain close contacts with everybody. Of course, very well, as for towards security, as for infrastructures, and so as for politics. But at the same time, we always remember that the first trade partners of Syria have always been Western European countries, which meant technology, which meant training, which meant everything else connected, and that satisfied different components of the country, different elements, different political orientations within the same country under anyway quite of a central authority. And if we underestimate this element of the fact that the international standing of that specific country, that it does exclude all other directions in terms of West, in terms of partnership with our Arab countries, or partnership with Russia, well, that's a recipe for disaster. And for not just for disaster for the Syrians that have endured so much, but disasters for everybody involved within the country. So if we cannot find out a suitable solution that will make room for for the different elements within the country, which means different partners elsewhere, well, the cost of being in Syria will be very high for a very, very long time. That was my point, and I think that might reproduce as well in Libya. Stop.
Thank you very much, Massimiliano. I would like to also, as I said, ask about this particular question one Russian expert, Pavel Vyacheslavic. If I could, bring you here just for 2-3 minutes on your view, how do you see maybe the issue of reconstruction between between Ankara, Damascus, and Moscow in the future? Do you think it's even imaginable that we will sometime in the future kind of have some kind of this discussion, or still Turkey will continue to support the areas it controls now in Syria and occupies? And how do you see the prospects for that? Just for 2 minutes to be short, and then we will go to conclusions.
Well, thank you, Ruslan, for a very interesting and intriguing question. I think that Turkey now is a place where another question is under very deep discussion and scrutiny. The possibility for a new wave of military intervention in Syria made by Turkey. And I think given this new discussion and your prospects for his military intervention, I think there's no room for discussion about post-conflict resolution, post-conflict reconciliation of Syrian society. Regarding this triangle, Syria, Russia, and Turkey, I think also there will be very difficult to find common ground for a common vision, joint vision of future for Syria. Regarding Syria, there is still a number of points which both Turkey and Russia cannot conclude. I mean, Idlib, first of all, and it will deteriorate any possible discussion about conflict resolution in Syria in this cooperation construction of three powers: Syria, Turkey, and Russia.
Thank you very much. I really see that issue definitely a bit complicated, and definitely share your view on the no discussions that because of there is a kind of a new pieces of news coming from that area that Turkey is preparing for some kind of a new military engagement there in that area, particularly on the area controlled by the Kurds in Syria. So I think that we've covered many issues. We've covered the issue of Syrian reconstruction and which is connected to the issue of Eastern Mediterranean because of its influences, the security in the Eastern Mediterranean and maritime security, even beyond that. I think that here we are coming to the closing remarks, and I would like to give the floor to Professor Andrey Kortunov for his last remark towards this issue. I think that we do not have with us Dr. Andrey Kortunov. I've just asked him. So, Andrey Vladimirovich.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, we have covered quite a vast ground of issues, historical and contemporary, starting from security to, as Ruslan said, very dubious issue of Syrian reconstruction. I'm profoundly grateful to all participants who expressed really their points of view, which is an enrichment of every personal perception of that. The only thing probably, we've established, I think, once again, that the Mediterranean basin is still in the center of the world and is in the center of the world politics, give or take. So that means that we are still in the game, and we will be doing a lot of work in this respect in the future. The only thing possibly that was left outside of our discussion, we'll have that maybe for the next year, is the new developments which are very near, which are basically one step forward, which is the hydrogen revolution in economics, which in the economy, which is predicted, and it looks as though it is being forged now, which to my mind will bring also new challenges to the area as with old players, but new roles and new political and economical constructs. But this is, of course, something for the future, something to look forward to, and something to analyze furthermore. Once again, I thank very much all participants, and I was really, really happy to see old friends today, which Zoom provides us new opportunities to meet without any hassle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey Vladimirovich. Dr. Kortunov, Andrey Vladimirovich, maybe you could also, make some conclusion remarks to that event. Andrey Vladimirovich.
Well, thank you. I didn't want to interfere into the discussion, though a couple of times I was tempted to make a couple of comments, but let me just give you a list of my takeaways from this very interesting discourse. I think that the first more or less evident conclusion that we can make is that we need to learn the art of humility, in the sense that external powers have quite limited ability to steer, to guide developments in the region. Definitely, in the end of the day, it's up to those people who live in East Mediterranean to fix the problems that the region confronts today. Second, I think that it's also clear that the current crisis, and I think that we can use crisis in plural, is not likely to fade away anytime soon. So we might hope for some positive changes and maybe some kind of accommodations, ceasefires, truces, but definitely the underlying reasons for these multiple crises are still there, and they will be there for an extended period of time. I'm afraid that the region has only entered a historically long period of profound social, economic, and political transformation, and things are likely to get worse before they get any better. Third, I think that what we can do is to make sure that external players can work together, not against each other, but to work together, pursuing common goals. Because in the end of the day, I think most of legitimate, rational-minded foreign players have essentially the same visions of the region in 5, 10 more years down the road. And to the extent possible, we should act not to complicate problems, but to assist in their solution, even if this solution is not likely to take place anytime soon. I think that this is definitely something that requires more conversations and more discussions about potential collaboration between Russia and the European Union, between Russia and Italy. And I think that we can be hopeful that at the level of think tanks, we can make our contribution at least to understanding of the problems, because my feeling is that at the political level, there is still a problem with understanding the root causes and the implications of this problem to all of us. And finally, let me say that though we can consider East Mediterranean to be a regional issue, but essentially it is not. It is a trans-regional issue because it affects Italy, it affects Russia, it affects Africa to a very large extent. So I think that we should not really underestimate the implications of what's going on in East Mediterranean on neighboring regions of the world. So in a way, it is a global problem, and therefore it requires a global solution. I hope that next year will be better. I hope that if we get together here in the online format or in the offline format in a year from now, we can claim at least some success stories. I'm not too optimistic about developments, but I still think that there are some low-hanging fruits and there are opportunities for solutions, not of all the problems in the region, but at least of some of them. Thank you once again, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kortunov. So let's hope for more success stories for the coming year. I think this is our last event in the Middle East track in RIAC. I would like here, also thank all our colleagues, and distinguished speakers who contributed today to this discussion. I would like to thank the team in the High School of Economics and the team in RIAC helping organize this meeting. Special thanks to Dr. Chuprigin and our support staff, technical support for making that happen. So thank you very much, and I think we could end here. We are just in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.